Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Tebogo Leshilo. I'm the underwriting head for the complex portion of the financial lines team, and I'll be your session host this morning. We've put together an interesting in-depth presentation on commercial crime as a class of insurance. We're looking at how do we manage risk, as well as looking at the mitigation of risk from both an insurer point of view, as well as the insured in the current crime climate. I think a lot of the brokers online, you probably would have noticed that SHA has historically pulled out of this line due to the loss experience. We've recently taken a different view to participating in this line again. So we'd like to just give you some insight as to what are the drivers behind the choices we've made, how are we doing this differently, and what is the future view. I'd like to first start by introducing Anton Meyer. Anton Meyer is the business head for claims within SHA. He's been here for, I think, about 15 years with the business. So he definitely has extensive underwriting experience, as well as understanding the claims history on the back of our commercial crime experience. I did forget to mention earlier, if you can please just type your questions in the Q&A box. We'll attend to them at the end of the session, time permitting. Good morning, Anton.
Morning, Tebs. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Brilliant, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Awesome, that's good. So Anton, as I've mentioned, SHA historically did participate in this line of business. We, a few years ago, took a decision to actually exit from this market. Can you give us some of the history as to what factors drove this decision?
Tebs, yeah, look, we were never, the go-to market, for crime to start off with. But I think, we also prefer to write some of the larger risks and participate on those. But I think, what happened over a period of, as you mentioned, during about 2018, 2019, we did a deep dive into the historic stats. And what we did was we sort of split, because there was a little bit of a split with regards to rating and competition and everything else. So what we did was we split the stats from 2008 to 2012, and then from 13 to 17, because at the time that was the last year we had with full, where everything was closed out and the years were done. But essentially what that revealed was that over a period of 10 years, our average loss ratio was 103%. Per annum. Okay, I think what made it more scary for us when we drill down into those two different periods was that we realized that during the first, I think it was the average loss ratio was 124%. So when we split it between the two periods, so 5 years, the first 5 years we ran at 103%. The last 5 years it shot up to 154%. And, we'll get into some of the specific details about that later. But essentially, that's what happened. I think, during the 10 years that we analyzed, there were 2 years that were below 100%. And they were both, I think, the best year was 82% and the other year was 86%. For the rest of them, they all exceeded 100%. And I think that's the bottom line. That is why eventually we decided to close the book on commercial crime. Well, not close it completely, but actually, no longer write the business the way we used to.
How many claims did we receive in that time, Anton?
Okay, let me put it to you this way. During the first 5 years, we had a notification ratio. I'm talking crime policy with a notification in excess of 54%. So 54% of the active policies on our book had a crime notification. Now, needless to say, not all of them would actually lead to claims eventually, because obviously some of them would be within the excess, there would be recoveries, that type of thing. So, but 54% of the active policies on the books had a notification. Okay, that reduced to about 34% in the last quarter. But I think it's more important to deal with, and now keeping in mind, we had a reasonably small book. We paid in the 10 years, we paid on average 15 claims per year. So in total, we paid 150 claims. So that is now closed. So the notification isn't really that big a deal. We are now looking more at the actual impact. And that was 150 claims that we paid over those 10 years. And I think the sad part is, we reduced the number of policies on the books. We increased the rates, we re-underwrote it in the latter part, from 13 to 17 onwards. We paid 75 claims in the first 5 years and 75 claims in the second. So the ratio of notifications to paid claims increased materially in the latter part. So there's been a whole host of those developments, and all of that led to where we are today.
Okay, so we certainly, that speaks to both severity and frequency on that portfolio. That certainly gives us some good insight into just why SHA took some of those decisions. Anton, just focusing on this slide, we had a look at the ACFE 2022 occupational fraud report, and this gives us some insight just as to who is responsible within organizations for the different type of crime losses that are suffered, as well as the quantums. We can see that there is a fair range between what you'd see at owner and exec level compared to what employees are capable of getting away with. Can you just speak to some of these trends, please?
Yeah, look, it certainly ties in with what we saw in our stats. The only difference on our side is that the figures quoted there are way, way, way off from where ours are. If we start talking employee manager, that line, we are looking in the region of about 2.5 million average claim. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, under the executive side, obviously the owner is, strictly speaking, excluded in terms of the policy. You can't really steal from yourself, but our average is sitting in the region of about 30 to 40 million, because we had quite a number of exceptionally large claims in the last 5 years. The initial 5 years, the average claim was about 1.5, but as I said, it increased to about 5.4 on average in the last 5 years. So the executive portion of our claims, definitely between 40 and 50 million. So it's a lot higher than what we've seen here.
Those are considerable figures, definitely higher than what's compared out of this report. Thank you very much, Anton.
Thanks, Debs. I can just maybe mention one more thing, that came through as a trend that we picked up. As I said, we split it between the first 5 years and the second 5 years. What we picked up in the second 5 years, and that ties in with what I just said about the value of the average claim where it came to execs, those frauds were committed over a period of 10, 11 years. So during our first 5 years, those frauds were being committed, but they were done in such a way that it was very cleverly hidden. The system, because the individual involved knew the system, was probably part of creating the system, and started defrauding the companies and the insureds from 5, 10, 12 years ago. So those frauds were just never detected. And they, of course, build up over periods. And that is also why we saw this huge increase in the average claims and the move towards execs in the past or in the last 5 years. But I think that's just something that I just needed to mention as well.
Okay, thanks, Anton. I think that also looks at just the familiarity of people with the systems, obviously breaches and control, as well as just a breakdown in the processes that are in place. So whilst they may exist on paper, we're seemingly seeing humans circumvent those measures in order to take those opportunities where they can steal money.
Correct. And I think the sad part is, I can honestly say that in the last 5 years, the period that I was referring to, we only wrote good, solid clients with big, proper compliance teams and all of that. And these individuals, knowing the system, still got around those. So it's if there's proper governance, someone will find a way to get around that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anton. I think that, we're looking at the human element. That's a big measure of where crime takes us. I think this is a good look into the next portion of our presentation, where we look at what are we able to do with tools and how can tools support us in managing this exposure. Anton, if there are any questions at the end, we'll ask you to pop back in. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Tibbs. Thanks, everyone.
For the next section, we're introducing Roanne Lazarus. Roanne is an underwriter within our financial lines team. Ro will give us some insights as to a particular tool that SHA has recently implemented called Frisk. We're looking at using technology-based tools to underwrite crime exposures. As we've mentioned, you may have controls that are in place within an organization, but we do need to look at real data pools that exist from actual organizations to assess controls, to assess the likelihood of controls being breached and opportunities for this to happen. So we'll start off just with a brief demonstration of what the Frisk tool is, and then follow with a brief chat with Roanne. Morning, Ro. How are you?
Morning, Tabs. Morning, everyone.
Thanks for joining us this morning. If you can tell us from the underwriting floor, just what is Frisk and how has this tool assisted you in your underwriting assessments?
Sure. So Frisk is a risk management AI tool that's really designed to assist in enhancing the internal fraud risk management, which is really done by digitally providing access to the insights of top forensic experts. It identifies vulnerabilities within each area of business, and it provides recommendations on how to enhance these controls and improve security within each area. So like we saw in the video, the responses provided to the questions within that proposal form is captured onto a tool, and the findings are then reflected by either a low, medium, or high risk matrix. This provides underwriters with a fairly good picture around the insured's controls. And just really looking at the matrix, it allows underwriters to immediately zone in into the areas where the concerns or weaknesses were picked up. For example, in their financial controls, IT and audit processes, as well as procurement and stock controls. For example, cyber is also something that we speak about a lot, and the IT and audit processes and controls. Underwriters consider the size of the company, and we understand that small businesses usually don't have, for example, fully fledged IT departments or dedicated IT personnel. However, minimum requirements like change of password, access control, evidence of antivirus softwares, and network audits must be present. So the tool allows the underwriters to go a little further to assess and analyze trends across the business, as well as different sectors, making it easier for us to identify. It then becomes a really nice and easy, seamless transaction in order to finalize terms once we've considered all the factors.
Thanks, Sharon. Can you just speak to some of the trends that you've picked up in your assessments?
Sure. So we've often come across a decentralized company, meaning that each of the locations or subsidiaries have their own semi-financial or operational or risk control. In these circumstances, we would insist on a separate policy be taken for each of the locations, where the standardized controls are not carried out throughout the business. So what I mean by this is that should a location or a subsidiary's controls differ from the controls that was mentioned in the proposal form, we would then ask for a separate policy to be taken out. I just want to touch on something interestingly that Anton also mentioned. The average organization loses about 5% of their annual revenue to fraud each year, and causing about 2.5 million Rand before it's even detected. Higher execs, like Anton mentioned earlier, we're looking at 40 to 50 million. So after committing a fraud scheme, the fraudster's next task is to conceal their actions as soon as possible. This means that they have to create new, well, not really new, but creative ways to go around so that their acts are undetected as the normal course of business continues. Interestingly, a study showed that the top concealment methods used by fraudsters are: number one, the creation of fraudulent physical documents, and those were 39% of the cases; alteration of physical documents, 32% of the cases; and creation of fraudulent electronic documents, which were 28% of the cases. So those with the ability to create and edit financial records have the opportunity to commit and conceal these fraudulent acts, which really speaks to the importance of segregation of duties, dual control, as well as the effective fraud detection methods. Lastly, I'd also like to note, fraudulent acts can be conducted and committed by employees of all levels, in all departments. But we've noticed that fraud schemes carried out by those that are trusted and in charge with governance tend to last the longest, and sure, it definitely costs the most.
Absolutely. I think one of the first things I remember when I first started underwriting crime was there's the old Tanny who doesn't take leave, and she's everybody's go-to person in the office, and that is typically the person who has the opportunity to perpetuate these crimes over a long period. And honestly, nobody is able to determine that it's her. A lot of these crimes, a lot of these crimes will be discovered in the event where this person has an unforeseen issue such as illness that sees them unexpectedly go on leave, and that's where losses will be discovered, especially over an extended period of time. And just Ro, I know the video, as well as you've mentioned just some of the recommendations that Frisk as a tool is able to put forward. Can you just give us some insight into that, please?
Yeah, so the recommendations vary from business to business, but I have to admit that, and even with the brokers that we have online, we've received really good positive responses regarding the recommendations. Often clients are really unaware of the gaps within their business and are willing to close that gap. So we encourage fraud detection and prevention. These recommendations are generally inexpensive and often consist of introducing an additional step or process to ensure that their fraud risk is minimized. It wouldn't be, it's a disclaimer, I would say, but I'm just saying that we must be mindful that implementing all those recommendations suggested doesn't guarantee against fraud, employee fraud. However, proactively managing the risk of employee fraud helps safeguard the business from falling victim to these internal frauds.
Thanks very much for your insights, Ro. I think what's important about the tool is when we look at underwriting, it isn't just our assessment alone. It's the integration of readily available alternative sources of info that we can use to gain additional information, used to support our underwriting process. We certainly are living in a very advanced technological era, so it doesn't make sense for us to stay static. And I think a tool such as Frisk will certainly support both the underwriters as well as the brokers. The best part as well are the recommendations, as you've mentioned. It's not just about us having a one-way direction of communication with the client. I think it's important that we're providing value as well through the use of these tools. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Tebo.
Cool. Okay, thank you. And just our next, our final speaker for this morning, we are having a chat to Makolo Kalambai. Makolo is the underwriting head for structured within financial lines. Also a seasoned insurance professional. Makolo is really just helping us look at why is SHA back in the crime market? What are the considerations that we've taken? What is some of our appetite? And just what are we as underwriters looking to do going forward on this class of business? Morning, Makolo. I don't think your camera's on. Are you there?
I am here. My camera is on.
I can see. Thank you.
Can you see me now?
Yes, I can. Thanks very much. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. Also, morning, everybody. Morning, the audience.
So, MK, we've heard from Anton just about SHA's decision a few years ago to take a hard stance to exit the crime market. We've now walked out of, we're in a new position where we're actually saying to the market, we're open for business again in this area. Can you just give us some insights as to what's driven our choices?
Yeah, thanks, Tebo. I'll do that just now. I just wanted to start with just making a comment about Frisk as a tool. In my last sort of interview on this product, I said that I was excited about crime, the crime opportunity. I'm not excited about crime, but I am excited about the technology and its potential, right? So, we've enrolled this. It's the first time that we're using this tool, and there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of things that we can add on as we use it. We can improve it and enhance. So for me, when I just use my imagination, I think the potential is pretty large. It's pretty huge, and from that it's quite exciting. We've probably done close to 100 assessments using this tool. So you can just imagine using technology and the data that we're capturing, how, later on, how we can start using that data, how that can help us even better, to be maybe more specific in some of the areas that we want to focus on and things like that. So that for me is exciting. Another aspect of it, having been a broker for 2 years, one of the pain that clients always go through is completing proposal forms.
Yep.
So our form, and I'd love to get some feedback from the brokers. The form seems quite simple, intuitive, it's online and easy to complete and to understand. And that form as well can be, using technology, can actually facilitate and make the renewal or the quote process much easier, especially the renewal process, because once you do it the first time, there could be potentially a way in future where it's accessible, the client has it, it's online, you just make slight changes from, looking at your risk prior to this year. Clients can actually access the form directly completed, and then, it just makes the whole process so much easier. And having been a broker and dealing with clients, I really understood that, as a market, we need to think of ways to make that data, risk information collection much easier. And I hope, we'll have to speak to our partners on that, just to develop that aspect as well. But it will make our clients so much, their life so much easier to transact with us, just in terms of collecting the underwriting and insurance information. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. For me, I think that is very exciting, and hopefully it's exciting for some of the brokers as well.
I think that's it, making business easier, right?
Yeah.
How do we transact? How do we shift some of the less pleasant elements out of the transaction? I recall when I started, when I was a junior underwriter, driving around to brokers to deliver policy docs.
Yeah.
And I've heard other underwriters speak to, I think, sending stuff by fax or receiving submissions by fax.
Yeah.
That was a little bit before my time, but I just think in general, we certainly do need to look at doing things differently.
Yeah.
Doing things the same way may not necessarily be efficient. We need to progress. And I think that definitely is where FRISC comes in. And as you've mentioned, the more and more we use this, I think what the brokers would obviously like, as well as the clients, is I think that sharper data lets us sharpen our pens a bit more, and we'll see more favorable terms, conditions as well into the market.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, for me, that's, like I said, it's very exciting. And then now, just to answer your question, why we've come back into the market now, obviously, we've had an experience. We've had experience before. We've learned from that experience, and we're putting together some remediation action so that we can be relevant, to our clients. I do think that there's still a need for the product. Roanne mentioned some of the statistics there, just in terms of what the exposures are, what percentage of clients' revenue can fall within the wrong hands of employee fraud and dishonesty and the loss. So the risk is definitely there. So we've learned our lessons. We're using enablers such as this tool that we're talking about today, to help us make better decisions, so that we can have a sustainable portfolio, and be a risk transfer, provide a risk transfer solution to our clients. So essentially that's the reason why we've decided to come back into the market, and we're starting to look at this transaction as a partnership between ourselves and the client. It wasn't always like that historically, and I think that's the approach. That's a new philosophy that we're going to implement, and hopefully we'll see better success than we did previously. So these are key reasons why we've come back into the market.
think, yeah, I look forward to just some of the feedback from the brokers after the session today as to are we aligned, right? Are we able to fulfill the broker's needs? Are we able to fulfill the client's needs for cover? But obviously at the same time, are we looking at using the right mechanisms and the right tools to do so? Imka, I think what is quite important as well is for us to communicate to our broker market just what our underwriting approaches and our strategy around crime, right? So it's good and well for us to say we're back in the game and this is what we are putting forward on the table. But I think you've spoken to partnership, we've spoken to enablement. How is it that we're looking to do this? What are the bounds in which we operate in? I think we could elaborate with that and certainly just give the brokers the tools to go out there in the market and deal with the clients.
Yeah. So I think this is really important, that we communicate our strategy, our appetite, how we're going about it, what we like, what we don't like, what we prefer, are we flexible or not, and yeah, I'll try and answer all of these, these questions now. So yeah, in terms of appetite, we look at, employees, locations, revenue. Those are some of the key risk factors, indicators that we look at when we are underwriting commercial crime. We've learned, and Anton mentioned, historically we used to write pretty large corporates, large employee numbers, large number of locations, large revenue earners, and things like that. What we want to focus on now, we want to make sure that the companies that we are targeting are able to manage and implement controls quite effectively over their entire staff complement, looking at the different segments from the top to the middle to the bottom and all of that. So we have to identify those types of entities. So this is, very key for us to be comfortable in that respect. Number of locations as well. The more locations you have, sometimes, the more difficult it becomes to apply consistent controls across all. Not only to implement them, but obviously, you can have a policy in place, but you actually have to enforce it. And the bigger you are, and the more difficult sometimes it becomes just to enforce controls. When you are that big. Our strategy, we're looking at risk management. We're looking at different segments. What I just wanted to be a little bit more specific about here in terms of segment is we targeting that market between SME and the large corporate. So I'm going to give a number as an indication. Just in terms of revenue, you're looking at from about 50 million Rand revenue up to maybe about 1 billion. That's the space that we want to sort of play in. That being said, there obviously might be clients who fall a little bit below 50 or a little bit, a little bit above. So we can always look at those on a case-by-case basis. But the key message that I wanted to put forward here is that, we haven't put a strategy to focus on the SME market. I think we need to be clear about that. There are maybe other markets, our competitors might be better geared to service that particular segment. It could be a segment that we start focusing on sometime in the future. But for now, as I say, the strategy that we're talking about now, what we've put in place is, that 50 million up to about, 1 billion. Business activities, I think I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slides. Obviously, there are some very, very high risk sectors that, you just know that, this sector is prone to having high, because they have high value stocks or cash or something like that. They tend to fall victim to crime more than others. So we have to be careful just in terms of the activities, and we're quite selective in terms of the activities that we, that we insure. And then the other one is just in terms of capacity. And here we're happy to do both primary and excess layer within this particular segment. But our capacity has significantly reduced. We're looking at deploying, between R1 million up to a maximum of 50. On a primary, we're probably looking at 20-25 million on the primary. And yeah, I mean, I always think that clients, obviously they have the exposure, they have their own sort of risk appetite, what they can handle internally. But I always think to myself, from one insurer, putting up 20 or 25 million capacity on a risk, is quite decent. I mean, if you lose 20 million rand and your insurer can pay that, you'd be happy. Obviously, yeah, some clients might have bigger exposures in that, and they can buy additional layers, and then we bring the other markets, other insurers onto the program, so that the risk is actually shared across various insurers. So that capacity for now, I think we're quite comfortable with from a primary perspective. But like I said, we can, depending on the risk, depending on the circumstances, deploy up to 50. And another point just to make on that is that, we don't have treaty protection around on that capacity. Our 20 or 50 million, we don't have treaty protection. Hence, we're being very selective. We're being quite cautious, and we have to, obviously we have an obligation to our shareholders as well, to return profit, So yeah, I'm saying quite a lot of here, yeah, but I think I've made my point. Just one last point that I want to make before we move on is that a completed FRISC form, or assessment form, will help us a lot in achieving what we're trying to achieve on this portfolio. Obviously, there are other proposal forms in the market out there, but we tend to find that it doesn't directly speak to the data that we need to input into our tools, so that we can offer a competitive quote and understand our risks the way that we want to, the way that we want to sort of move forward. That being said, we can quote subject to, or we can still receive competitors' forms and quote with some subjectivities, depending on whatever information that we find that's missing.
Thanks,
Did I answer the question?
Yes, I think you've answered the question and a bit more. I think the biggest tie-in, looking at the 3 different towers here, is this isn't really just about an insured shifting 100% of their exposure over to us as underwriters, right? So we need to look at what is the risk management in place at a client? What are they taking on for their own portfolio, right? Be it through the use of controls, be it monetary by the application of a deductible, as well as looking at tools like co-insurance and excess layers. It isn't really about, and probably contrary to what we've done in the past, where we would have run in and taken big lines, big chunks of risky business without putting any onus back on the client. We're looking at a more dynamic process, and just fully understanding what can we carry on the basis that there is some adequate management of risk on the client's part. And just looking at, you'd mentioned earlier, just some of the red flags. If you can just give us some insight into that. And I think what's important is, what lessons do we pick up from the fact that we're able to identify these?
Yeah, so these are just some of the clear sort of obvious red flags in terms of occupation and exposures. So attractive stock, your cell phones, or fast moving consumer goods, whether they are sitting in a warehouse or being transported, those are quite obvious. That is a red flag. It's probably an area that we, just in terms of business activities, that we want to avoid or decline. But we also understand that we'll treat the risk on a case by case. If there's a good reason, there's a business case, to take on some of these risks, we can consider them. But unfortunately, most of the time, clients, or just the information or the engagement, we tend to fall short of the standard that we're looking for, just in terms of managing this risk. It could be, I don't know, maybe the claims history or the level of deductible that the client is wanting to put on, and we end up not really being competitive in that area. So probably not an area or the types of risks that we want you to be sending to us all the time, because we're going to have difficult conversation with those. Same goes with state-owned entities as well as non-profit organizations. We tend to see that the controls are a little bit weaker, not a little bit, significantly weaker in these types of organizations. The other one is decentralized operating model. This is quite a difficult one, because the client will complete a form for the entire group. Say they've got multiple locations, and they've got maybe a diverse types of operation or diverse businesses, right? Because they want to be entrepreneurial, they kind of let each business unit sort of run the way that they want to run to be effective, in the way that the way they want to, in terms of the way they want to operate. It becomes very difficult, because you will get one form for the group, because they are subsidiaries, so you get the form, but it could be essentially 3, 5, or 10 different business risks exposures, because it's decentralized. But we receive, we don't get the right picture. And we've seen issues in terms of claims on these types of structures. So it's one that we have a question mark on that. Claims and corrective.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Looking at just your stock, your warehousing, logistics, those are often, so your red flags kind of cascade into each other, right? So looking at sometimes the complexity of the business and the different pieces, that is where you would find typically that there would be those decentralized models in place.
Yeah. They are extremely sort of difficult to, not difficult. I mean, we can underwrite them, but they are challenging risks. To underwrite, get a grip of exactly what's happening and all that. So, when it comes to claims and corrective actions, we often, the key point here that what we look, I mean, it is a red flag. If you've had claims, then we sort of, you probably not necessarily a worse risk than your peers, but you have had a claim, so it does kind of affect your risk profile as a client. What we'll usually look for here is just to make sure that the correct actions have been put in place to prevent or to improve and things like that. And a lot of the times we actually, sometimes it's not strong enough, just in terms of what we're looking for there. So that tends to get us as underwriters to ask a lot more questions and be a little bit adverse there. Budget loss making. One of the requirements we're going to be looking at as well is looking at clients' financial statements. So we will ask for the risk form and then the latest financials. And the reason for that is that, I mean, if the client is struggling financially and that they are distressed, the chances are that, there isn't budget available to put the necessary controls in place, which is it's a requirement for us to be comfortable taking on that risk. So so that's an important one there as well. It's a red flag that we have to think about. And then just the last one, the risk recommendation. So I'll put this one here. All of the ones that I've mentioned so far, our red flags we pick up before we do our risk assessment, before we assess. But there can be red flags that are raised post the assessment. I think you would have seen from the video when Roanne's session, at the end of our assessment, the tool gives us the ability to identify areas where there are red flags, and sometimes that can lead to us either declining to quote or implementing stricter conditions, higher deductibles, or requesting additional information. So, just the fact that you've completed the form, submitted the information, does not necessarily guarantee a successful quote. We still need to be comfortable, the outcome, the output from the assessment has to be positive, so that we proceed to the next level of quoting. So I just wanted to make that point clear as well.
Great, thanks, Makolo. Just looking at the next slide, SHA releases an annual risk survey every 2 years. And part of what we do is we go out into chatting to our brokers, chatting to clients, looking at different sizes and types of corporations and industries, and essentially collating some of this info to communicate to the broker market what it is that we're seeing, the trends that we're seeing, and just some of the stats in particular relating to crime. We picked up that 15% of respondents had been victims of employee fraud. An important second number is looking at 53% didn't actually have any budget allocated to employee fraud prevention, right? So do you think that clients have a strong handle on managing these exposures?
I don't think it's not yet. I think we've gone through quite a difficult time with COVID and the economic conditions. Financially, clients are struggling. So this 53% stating that they don't have budget allocated to prevent, it is concerning. So we got to try and work with those types of clients as well to try and assist them. And I think there are ways that they can, if you don't have the budget, we kind of need to understand how else can you give us the comfort that you have handled
that you're managing these exposures.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
So there
thanks,
are, if I can just Teboko, there's three things that I just wanted to mention here. So there's technology, there's loss prevention technology available, that comes at a cost, obviously. Then the other level is maybe looking at experienced employees. So you'll have to hire employees who understand governance and how to put controls, how to implement. You need that skill. It doesn't just happen, right? So that also comes at a cost. But the one that may be less costly could be just your own sort of practices and risk management. What's the word that I'm looking for? You're just enforcing the controls that you have. So looking at background checks, lifestyle audits, segregation of duties, which Roanne mentioned earlier on, rotation of employees and stuff like that. So those are some of the other things that if you can demonstrate to us and show the evidence, we'll be more than happy to see how we can manage and assist clients in that regard.
Thanks, Makolo. Just onto the last slide, we are just cognizant of time. Can you just give us some brief insights into the underwriting practice? I think this is important that brokers know what to expect as to how are we addressing crime in practice going forward.
So we've already spoken a lot about the first two, so I'm not going to repeat today. Other ways that we're looking to manage this portfolio is the annual deductible and the rolling retro. the intention there is really to share the risk between ourselves and the client. Because you would have, you recall Anton mentioned that some of the losses we saw that really hurt us was that they were taking place over, multiple years. Which means that, there wasn't enough risk management in place to prevent, or not to prevent, to detect, the fraud going on. So by applying a multi-year deductible, it's basically penalizing or sharing the risk with the client for each year that they were not able to, to detect it. And the other one is a rolling retro. The maximum we offer is 3 years. This again forces clients to detect. So, you don't want a loss to be going on for so long. If you have those controls in place, technically speaking, you should be able to detect within the 3 years. And that way we're comfortable that whatever you discover during that period, we can carry it, we can transfer that risk to us as the insurer, and we'll be happy to share with the client in that regard as well. We do not apply both at the same time. You can use one or the other. I think it's a better approach.
I think thanks, Makolo. I think the one thing brokers certainly are always concerned about is price. 30% of the brokers that we interviewed looking at our annual risk survey indicated that the hardening of pricing in the crime sector was a concern. What can we expect going forward, given what we've presented, looking at the use of tools, deductibles, managing the sectors, all of that?
Yeah, I think the important message that I want to send now is that, firstly, once we put all of these enablers, the tools, our underwriting approach in place, selecting the segment, we are able to then be more flexible on pricing. So our entire strategy sort of comes together, and this is the end of it, right? So, we look at the risk management, how we collect the information, we assess it, then we ask more questions and all of that. Once we're comfortable with everything, the price comes last. And when we're satisfied with the process up to the quoting stage, I believe that we would be able to be more flexible and be a bit more competitive on price. And yeah, we, in fact, if we can get feedback, from brokers out there, if we are, or for whatever reasons, we're always willing to learn and improve, and to see how we can change and be able to work better and with our brokers to help our clients.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Makolo. Thank you as well to Anton and Roanne. And thank you especially to the audience for taking time to sit with us this morning, to listen to what we have to share. I think we have given a fair amount of just insight as to where are we in this journey, underwriting crime. I hope that we've communicated just the importance of that balance between risk retention, risk mitigation, and risk transfer. And just how do we go about this from an underwriting perspective? I do see there have been some questions. We'll address those directly to the people who asked them. But thank you very much, everybody. Take care.